Hello everybody, this is Bill McFadden from Tone Pure Music, and in this video we're going to get into Sonokinetic Sotto. And Sotto consists of strings, woodwinds, and brass, and it's a phrase-based library, and it has some pretty amazing features. Right now I have the strings selected in the DAW, and if I hit a chord, so here I have a C major chord, and I can, in this region right here, you can see if you hit a triad, either a major or minor, in any inversion or the root position, it activates the phrases. And there are actually three phrases taking place. I can mute the, say, bottom phrase and the mid phrase, and then when I hit the C minor chord, you just hear the top phrase. Now, what's really nice is if I click on this icon here, I actually see the notes that are being played. And not only that, I can drag those notes into my DAW by just clicking on this icon here, and then dragging it into my DAW will actually place the MIDI in the DAW, which is really nice. So now let's listen to the midsection of the strings. So I have the upper and the lower muted. So now we're listening to this. And again, you can look at the actual notation that's going on. So, and notice they're using saltato as an articulation as well. So that's the mid. Let's listen to the low. And here's your music. So sol pont, they're using in the low section. So again, you have, and not only that, let's go ahead and unmute the top two sections. And let's go ahead and focus on the low section here. If I click on this, I have a choice of all these various phrases I can use. And I have low, options, mid, and high. So I can choose all of these phrases in this section. So let's go ahead and mute the top two again. Okay, we're listening to this. By the way, this little dot says there's a variation. So if I click on that, there's a variation of that patch. But let's go ahead and click on this, and let's go to the low, which is your lower strings. And then you can actually addition the various options you have available. So here's one option. Here's another. And you can see the icon gives you an idea. Here you have like quarter notes, here you have eighth notes, 16th. This looks like it'll be a tremolo. So they have a visual representation of what you're hearing. And again, we can look at the actual sheet music, and I'll show you how you do that for these. And then we can audition this. So that's a nice one. Let's go ahead and click on that. I'll play the C minor chord. I could play a C major chord. And remember, I can play any of your 12 keys from C to B, including sharps and flats, and I can do major or minor. For example, if I want to do a D minor, whoops, let's go down here. Here's a D major. And some of the patches are neither minor nor major. This one is. That's what the minor major indicates. And then here is the actual sheet music that would be involved. And again, you could drag that MIDI into your DAW if you wanted to. You don't need to. unless you have a library that you would prefer to use for those patches. So, and you can do that for the low section. We can choose any of those articulations we were looking at. Also in the mid section, you can do the same thing. Let's go ahead and look at the mid section here. I'll play a G minor chord. And if we click on this, they've actually selected a patch in the mid. So here's some of the mid patches you have. There's like a tremolo with sol pond, it sounds like. Interesting chord there. And we could look at the music and find out what it is. And then here we have this. So it's like we have a trill underneath. And let's go ahead and take a look at that. If I click on it, and then I click on the music icon, there's your sol tasto, and then there's your actually a little 16th notes being played, adjacent 16th notes. So you can actually sharpen your hearing skills by trying to figure out what it is they're doing to simulate or realize the sound you're hearing. And we can go down the list. Here you have an arpeggio. You can see the graphic indicates that. Here you have some strings coming in sequentially. Here it looks like you have maybe a fifth going on. An interval taking place. We can hear the pizzicato going on there. And here we have. And then nice arpeggio, a chord maybe. Yeah, sounds like a fifth. The PAR indicates it's probably not minor or major. So there you have quarters, here you have eighths, here you have sixteenths. And then here you have a nice little orchestrated string thing. So that's all of your mids, and then in your highs, you have these phrases. Now, by the way, you can put any of these patches in any of your three available slots. You have these three slots. So let's just call it lower, mid, and higher slot. And then you can put within these slots, you can put the low, mid, or high patches. So if I go to the high patches, we have that, or this, or this. And then, so these are all the possibilities. Another arpeggio. And so right now, we just have the mid section open, or unmuted, so I'll unmute all three. And notice these keys down here, starting at actually G1. If I type that key lightly, it turns to green, which means I'm muting it. So you can mute them and unmute them using key switches. So I could unmute this one just by lightly touching the A key. And then here's B1. So I've muted all of them now. So if I play a chord, you won't hear anything. Now, if I hit them with a high enough velocity, then they reactivate. So now they're back. They're all back in. And this same structure is available for not only the strings, but also for the woodwinds. Let's take a look at the woodwinds briefly. So now we're looking at the woodwinds. So when I hit a chord, all three of these phrases are being activated. And again, I can mute them either by key switches, like so. So now I'm just listening to the bottom phrase. If you click on that icon, then you see all the possibilities you have for the, in this case, they have it as mid, or actually it's low. So here's all of your low phrases. And again, we can get the sheet music by loading it in and then clicking on the sheet music icon like we did with the strings. So here's another phrase. There's another phrase. Oops. And another one. So you have quarter notes, now eighth notes, now 16th notes. They all seem to have that pattern as we saw in the strings. And then the last pattern in the mid category, or actually low category. Then we have mids, so we can choose any of these. Let's listen to some. And so you have all of these possibilities. There's like a interesting pattern. Nice arpeggio, a chord, little higher register chord, little runs. And so now you may be wondering, well, what are all of these things over here? Well, you have the keys up here. Actually, for the woodwinds, starting at the key E, E4, because they're C4. So here we have E4. Actually, we'll switch the patches they have loaded in here, which you can change. But notice as I go from E to F, all these things change. So if I play a chord, so there are 4 different configurations you can use by hitting these keys for the woodwinds from E4 up to G4. And if I go back to the strings, so from C4, the same thing is true. You have this configuration at C4, and then if I go to C sharp 4, we get a different configuration of the 3 string patches. And there's yet another one. And so we have 4 altogether. And again, we can change these by clicking on this and changing the pattern. So if I add that one in, now the high is going to have this new pattern. In the key switch I was currently on, which is E flat 4. So if I go back to what we had over here, if I go back to E4, it stays there. So you can change it and then save your session, and that configuration will be there for you. So let's take a look at the brass. So on the brass, if I play a chord, I get a configuration. Now notice for the brass, if I go from A flat 4 to A floor, it changes. There's B flat 4, and there's B4. So again, you have 4 different configurations for the brass. Now the coup d'etat, and again with the brass, you have these 3 levels. And then with each level, here's the bottom level. You can choose low, mid, or high. And just to give you an idea what we have available on the low, okay, unless you hit that speaker icon just right, it takes you back. So there's the low. There's another option, another phrase, 3 chordal phrases. Here we have slight syncopation. Another chordal phrase. dissonant chord, little syncopation going on. Sounds like fifths there. A little bit of a crescendo. Looks like a chord. Here we have your fourths, which here we have our eighths, sixteenths. Sounds like a major chord there, which could be played minor as well. Then we have like half notes. And then, of course, you have more. That was just the low section. You have the mids. So your mid brass, which would primarily be your French horns. All these different variations. And again, we can get sheet music just like we did before. If I click on this and then click on the music icon, there you go, the notes. So here's quarter notes, and we're in the mid range now. Hear a little bit of trumpets in there, trumpets and horns maybe. Some mutes. Okay, let's go ahead and click on that. Look at the sheet music, and gives you the dynamics. There's horns, so it's no trumpets in that particular one. And then let's take a look at this one here. So some nice, this is more chaotic here. And if we look at the sheet music, notice it tells you it's just being, they give you some note patterns that are being played. And now, if we put all three of these together, so I'll go ahead and activate strings and woodwinds. So when I hit a key, or a chord actually, okay, then we're listening to all three of them simultaneously. So we're listening to the strings, we're listening to the woodwinds, we're listening to the brass. And then by hitting these key switches down here, like I'm changing the strings patch to its first, using its first configuration. There's the second string configuration, the third string configuration, and right now the woodwinds and the brass are the same configuration. And now, by going up, I'm now changing the woodwinds configuration. If you look at the woodwinds, you can see them changing. And now I'm changing the brass. Now getting back to the brass briefly, let's look at this up here. They've used the high brass, and then they usually do the top level is usually the high, the mid level is usually your mid brass strings or woodwinds, and then your bottom. That's the way I would do it. If I'm configuring them for a cue, I use the bottom for the lower strings, brass, or woodwinds, just to keep it more organized. But you can mix them around if you want. So here's some more high brass. Let's look at that cue. See what the sheet music is saying. So there you see trumpets consordino. So you have your mutes going on, and it sounded like you had mutes. And again, I can now we have these four possibilities for each of the sections. So if I hold down a chord, I've got the C minor chord down again, I can, let's say, choose the first configuration for the strings, which is C4, and then the first configuration for the woodwinds, which is E4, and then the first configuration for the brass, which is G sharp 4. And then if I want, I can change the strings, then hit A4 and change the brass. So you can do these in any order that you want. So there's a lot of different configurations, and we're just using these 4 prefigured patches. So we can, or actually there's 4 configured for to explain what I mean, if we go to the strings, here's the first configuration, second, third, and fourth. So I can switch between these 4 configurations, the 4 configurations in the woodwinds and the 4 configurations in the brass, and mix and match. So you get all kinds of variety. And then you can change the configurations. So I could change this to say this. I could change this to that. And I could change this to say that. And so you get an entirely different patch. And that's been stored in the current configuration I had for the strings, which was right here at E flat 4. And it's still there. So as you see, there's a tremendous amount of variety. It's a great learning tool. You can take the MIDI and drag it into your DAW. And if you do that, you'll get, if I drag it down here in Cubase, it actually will create a couple of MIDI tracks in an instrument. And there's your MIDI that I just dragged in. So it's quite a powerful program. So I would recommend it. It's currently on sale for 99 euros, normally 249 euros. So this is Bill McFadden. If you like this video, please click like. If you wish to subscribe, then coming up, you'll see my portrait icon. If you click below that, then you can subscribe. So Bill McFadden signing off from Tone Pure Music.